I would like to begin by paying my respects to the Malakati people of Southern Lutruwita, Tasmania, where I live and work. I acknowledge your elders, your communities, your young people, and your long and ongoing history of caring for country and communities. I also acknowledge the leadership and contributions of First Nations people and organisations to Croakey's work as directors, members, contributors, supporters, funders, and readers. In particular, a shout out to our current co-chairs, Professor Bronwyn Fredericks and James Blackwell, and our previous chairs, Professor Megan Williams and adjunct Professor Janine Mohammed. As someone of very colonial ancestry, I strive to listen to and learn from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people about ways of doing, being and knowing that prioritise caring for country and community, as well as respecting ancestors and future generations. I'd really like to acknowledge First Nations people joining us here today, in particular contributing to the panel discussion. And a big shout out to you all today for making time to join us in developing some collective plans. It's really nice to see some Croakey directors here and members, and also to acknowledge we have a new director. We actually have two new directors at Croakey. We'll be putting out an announcement soon, but here today we have Professor Rebecca Ivers, who's just joined us, and there's Alison Bahone as well. And if there are any other Croakey members, please jump into the chat and introduce yourselves. I can see a few there. That's great. There's some housekeeping details in the chat. I would like to just introduce by saying the webinar is about enabling and informing our coverage this year, and also to update you on some of our plans for the year ahead. The Croakey team will drop some questions for your consideration into the chat to give you some time to reflect before we hear your thoughts later on. And we're really delighted to start the discussion with a short briefing from Karl Briscoe, a proud Kuku Yalanji man from the Mossman Daintree area of far north Queensland. Karl is a man of many hats. I'm just going to mention a few of them. He's CEO of the National Association of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Workers and Practitioners, co-chair of the Close the Gap campaign, which has a very important date coming up. And we'll then hear from Michelle Isles, CEO of the Climate and Health Alliance, and Alex Cramb, who's the new CEO of the Public Interest Journalism Initiative. So we encourage you to post some questions for speakers in the chat, which we can come back to after their presentations. So now, Karl, over to you. If you could spend a few minutes just telling us what are the key issues that you'd like Croakey to be thinking of covering this year, especially in the lead up to the federal election. And of course, we're after any hot tips that you might have for stories, and also wondering if you have any specific calls to action for us about how we do our business, what we're covering, and for Croakey readers, any calls to action to our communities out there. So over to you, Karl.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa. I do want to just acknowledge the Ngunnawal people on whose country I'm zooming in from today. Beautiful landscapes that make up this country as well. As Melissa said, I'm a Kuku Yalanji man from Mossman Daintree area, but my day job has me down on Ngunnawal country, leading up NAATSIHWP and also the co-chair of the National Close the Gap. I suppose, you know, in kind of just reflecting on the question around what are some of the key issues. Well, obviously, you know, we all hear around the cost of living crisis and things like that. But what we don't really kind of see is the impact from the cost of living on people's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and mainstream, like the health effects from not being afforded nutritional food. And so, yeah, I don't really see that much mention of the on the impacts of health from this cost of living crisis. Obviously, you know, fresh fruit and veg, if it's unaffordable, of course your health is going to suffer in one way or another. But I don't kind of see that portrayed, you know, in the media. I suppose the other kind of big ticket item that really is out there. It's like green energy versus nuclear energy, especially, you know, in terms of protecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, especially sacred sites and land. We know that culture is really good for the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So by protecting the land, enables us to have a much enriched well-being. The other areas, you know, we hear about the efficiency, the new kind of efficiency minister looking for efficiencies. I suppose what is really interesting to note, you know, it's they talk about a lot of monies being spent on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The Indigenous expenditure report, the latest one, it's 2017, it shows 33 billion being spent on Indigenous specific programs. But 27.4 billion of that goes to mainstream organisations. So only 6 billion goes to Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander organisations. Like, you don't hear that that other side of the argument. And so if we are looking for efficiencies and things like that, really, yeah, tell the whole story. I think I might leave it there. So I'm happy to go on, but yeah, I think that's probably a really good start.
Thanks so much, Karl. There's some important issues there that we can follow up, and certainly food security is a big issue on our radar, especially for remote communities. So we do hope to be covering that more. But perhaps that's something for the wider sector to be taking up as well, in terms of what advocacy other health organisations can do around that. So, Michelle, over to you. What are the key climate and health issues that you think Croakey should be covering this year in the lead up to the election, and any leads you have for hot stories? We've got a few questions probably for you as well. And do you have any specific calls to action for us and for our readers around climate and health matters?
Thanks, Melissa, and so lovely to be with you all here today. I'm joining you from Boonwurrung country, acknowledge elders and the shifting sands about 200 metres from me that reveal thousands of years of connection to this place. I started February on Wajak Noongar Budja with family. It's always a heavy time of year, but reminded me, you know, hearing stories from family just about justice, that health is a justice issue. And when we think about climate change, it's an inequity multiplier. And I talk to the strength of family and community across Australia, but also we have to be cognizant, and I'd, you know, as a call to action up front, and thinking about both global context and the context leading up to the election. And what we've heard from Karl, thank you, is really centering that health justice and equity. And in relation to climate change, there are things we don't know about the political environment that are going to emerge in the next few months, the Western Australian election being key, and the federal election. But what we do know about climate change is 2024 was the hottest year recorded on record, and that was the second year that was the case. And we've already breached, I say with great sadness and regret, the limits of the Paris Agreement on climate change, which was to have a cap of 1.5 degrees warming based on scientific and health evidence around the consequences of that. So we're in an urgent situation. We've been in a climate emergency, I'd argue, for the last 20 years, but this is the year to act. So this sustainability action within health, so looking at the role of health in decarbonising, looking at its footprint. But I think what has already emerged in the last couple of years, we're going to be doing that through looking at the value of care. So we want to still be focused on patient care from a person-centred care thinking more broadly to community and environment, to try and really drive down that footprint. And so with the National Health and Climate Strategy now a year in, we have an implementation plan. It's going to be really key to have that implementation plan resourced. And what that looks like is, yes, having policy oversight, so a well-resourced team within the Australian government, but of course resourced across and with health systems and actors to be able to deliver on that. And we have put together a pre-budget submission, working with, you know, a lot of our member organisations, up to 50, to really articulate a way forward in regards to training and supporting that effort across Australia. But this is in the face of the climate shocks and stresses that we're facing right now. So I don't need to tell you that across Australia right now, and thinking of, you know, up in North Queensland and across the country, health systems and health professionals are under stress, and they're on the front line of climate impacts. And so we've already seen, as I said, record-breaking temperatures, but also this increased frequency of events. So what's going to be critical this year to focus on is the resourcing and the response to disaster preparedness. So that's through training, acknowledging the existing stresses on health professionals, really holding the mental health and well-being of our health professionals in these contexts, but being able to drive national coordination, but local bottom-up responses. There's a lot to that, but you know, this is a brief. So we have an election coming up. We have climate change, Mother Nature showing us some of the impacts that we're creating. So making the link between the health harms of our current trajectory around using fossil fuels, and next week we're going to be releasing some an analysis with some health economists around some predictions, for example, around nuclear, really with a view to nuclear. At the moment, as it's proposed, will delay any transition. So we're prolonging coal and gas, other fossil fuels, which we know are creating health harms. So being able to show the costs, the election, yes, will be about cost of living. If I had a moment for a quick story, Melissa, you please cut me off. But this morning I got in my 9-year-old's newsletter. He was going to camp. I looked at the location. It's 2 kilometres from a coal-fired power plant, so where the pollution enters. Now, we know the vulnerability of children to air pollution. It's a much longer story as to how that camp is able to operate there. But what my son said was quite telling, knowing that he could see I was going to act. And he said, "Mum, please don't make them move the camp, because then it might become more expensive for other families." And while I really was heartened by his empathy, what his line was also something that I hear often, and that is, we're talking about cost of living. Even in our emissions modelling, we talk about potential impacts by transitioning quickly away from fossil fuels, and yet we're not accounting for those health costs. So that's something, we need to focus on in the lead up to the election, putting health first. Many of our members are advocating for, and we're going to be providing some evidence around that. So, impacts to accessing healthcare and damage to health infrastructure is happening right now as a result of these climate events. So we really need to emphasise that also. And the social costs of displacement, access to insurance, livelihoods, homes, those social determinants of health are really going to be key. So more than ever, we need health voices to be raised. Still the most trusted voices. We need to hear from you. So, join us and our members in these efforts in and around the election. And, there's a whole global context, but perhaps we'll get into that a bit later.
Thanks so much, Michelle. As you say, there's a lot to unpack there, and just thinking the links up with Karl's comments as well around the focus on efficiency versus the need to invest and support the health workforce in particular. That's such a recurring topic at Croakey. And now I'm really delighted to introduce Alex Cramb, and I have to say that Alex has literally just taken up his new job with the Public Interest Journalism Initiative in the last few weeks. So it's really fantastic that he's made time to come and talk to us. And, you know, Alex area now with public interest journalism advocacy and development is just so critical to all those issues that you raise. So it's going to be very interesting to hear from Alex and his diagnosis, I guess, of the media landscape and any advice for people attending today or wider Croakey community about engaging with media and media policy reform. So Alex, for those who aren't familiar with the Public Interest Journalism Initiative, and I'd imagine that's a lot of people here possibly, can you tell us a little bit about the organisation, the state of the media landscape and why it matters for the Croakey audiences? And also perhaps you can give people a little bit of an idea of your history before Pidgey, so they know the background that you have and how you see the election campaign unfolding, and what opportunities there might be for health stakeholders for communicating and engaging with communities in this really critical time. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa, and hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me along. I'm coming to you this evening from the Yalanji peoples of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge all of our First Nations participants this evening. It really is great to be part of this conversation. So the Public Interest Journalism Initiative, we call it Pidgey for short, has been around for 5 years. It's focused on thought leadership, research, and advocacy in the public interest journalism space. The public interest journalism is any responsible journalism that is accountable, fact-based, and seeks to inform the citizens of our great nation so that they are better informed when it comes to making decisions and understanding important matters of policy affecting them particularly. And, you know, we see that as fundamental to a robust democracy. It's never been more important, I think, as we see things changing so quickly these days, that our communities are well informed, and that we keep an eye on the kinds of information and journalism that is being employed to disseminate information to our communities. It would be fair to say, and look, you know, as Melissa said, I've been in the job for 5 days, so bear with me, it'll be a little bit high level, but it's fair to say that that the initiative has been very research focused, and that research has been robust, peer-reviewed academic research, which has been really looking at the sector. And even Croakey has used some of those findings in some of the articles they've written on public interest journalism, and the work that you guys have done, I have to say, is fantastic. I had a bit of a look to refresh my memory, and really you're you know, gold standard when it comes to keeping an eye on this sort of stuff. But it's fair to say that if there was a time when it was necessary for fire spotters to be measuring the ecosystem and reporting on things like closures of regional mastheads, concentration of media outlets into fewer and fewer hands, and its impacts, particularly in regional area. It's fair to say that these days, I think we all agree that we don't need fire spotters, we're on fire. And so it's my job to pivot Pidgey from a research focus to an advocacy focus. And I think I'm excited about that because whilst we'll still be doing research and publishing, hopefully, a lot of important statistics and measurements to help us in talking to governments and formulating policy, I think it's important for Pidgey to come out of the shadows and stand in the spotlight, and with publications and organisations like Croakey, shout loudly about the importance of responsible, accountable journalism. I think that one of the most worrying things from my perspective and our organisation's perspective, and I'm sure you share this, is, and especially through COVID, we've seen the damage that is done through mis and disinformation, both distinct from one another, but have a very significant impact. And why is that important for us? it undermines social cohesion. And we know that that's, again, under threat like it has never been in this country at this very moment. And ultimately, that eats away at the robustness of our democracy. And, you know, we've seen democracies around the world shifting. We've seen more and more authoritarian regimes take precedence, and we've seen a lot of nations, communities, basically just allow that to happen because the other voice, the counterfactual, hasn't been loud and clear. So we think, especially as we approach a federal election, and especially as we approach a federal election in the wake of some other national elections around the world, where we've seen misinformation and disinformation being utilized, particularly on digital platforms, undermining a lot of, they call it legacy media, but let's call it responsible and accountable media, so that the accountable voices, investigative journalism, fact-based journalism is being more and more marginalized as people enter and happily live within their echo chambers. Now, that's all pretty highfalutin stuff. And what's that got to do with health? I think everything. I think that all of the issues that have been raised by the two previous speakers are absolutely important and vital. My concern, and I'm sure the concern of many people, is that these issues disappear because they're not front and center. There's not enough conflict in them, and the political voices within that are most predominant in an election campaign and the media are only interested in the very superficial fights, name calling, and the very easy attack lines that make an election in this country more and more a personality competition and not one based on true policy discourse. So never before, I think, has this been important. We want to work with organizations like Croakey. We want to contribute to what you're saying, and we'd love you to be contributing to what we're saying. And we would like to take concerns both at a funding level, where it comes to the funding models for journalism, for journalists and job security, but also at a policy level and at a macro level, looking at how social cohesion, public health, our underlying democratic pillars are being eroded, whether that's just through disinterest or misinformation, and what we can do to provide platforms for other voices to provide a counterfactual in a 35-second grab world. And I know that because, as Melissa suggested, I explain, and I'll try and do it quickly. I worked for a long time in politics. I worked most recently for the Labor Party. I worked in Anthony Albanese's election team, for a few years from opposition, working to change government. And for a few decades before that, have worked at both the state and federal levels on plenty of election campaigns, but also within ministerial offices, with a focus on comms, communications, and dealing with the media. My last job was actually riding in the aeroplane with all the journalists on the election campaign. So let's say the diversity of levels of capacity for absorbing information and reporting truthfully, are disparate, and it's something that I really feel passionate about. And I think that the work that you guys do at Croakey, along with a lot of other not-for-profits in the same space, and hopefully the work that Pidgey will do, will go a long way to reminding people of what's important and what kind of a job people should be doing when it comes to informing our community in a responsible fashion.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's great to have you in that role, and we really look forward to working together going forward. I would just like to throw to Professor Rebecca Ivers. We're very happy and grateful that Professor Ivers, as I'm sure many of you know, a very busy person, has agreed to come on the Croakey board this year. And nothing like throwing you in the deep end, Rebecca, before you've even had a chance to come to a board meeting, your first official Croakey event. Be great to hear what's going through your mind listening to our speakers and what you take away from it as well for our work.
Thanks, Melissa. And I have to say what an honour and a privilege it is to be on the board of Croakey. I'm very fond of Croakey and really, admiring of the incredible work you and partners have done for so many years. So it is the voice. It does feel a little bit like the voice in the wilderness, but I think that's what we're all here for. So it's great to be here. And I really concur with all the comments that people have made and the commentary that we've heard. And so it's really important, particularly in this year with election, that there is independent journalism. And watching what's happening, really what's happening to media over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, it's been pretty extraordinary. The shutting down of regional newspapers and community newspapers, and the fact that there aren't independent local voices that are working for the interests of local communities. And even, the big mainstream, watching the funding decrease, and we know the Sydney Morning Herald, for example, shrinks day by day, and the number of journalists go across from the ABC and other places where you might expect to get some kind of degree of independent journalism. We're really not seeing that. So Croakey's role is really, really, really important. One of the things that I think a lot about, and I think it's playing out, and the role, the importance of data and truth is more and more important. I know you will all, like me, be watching the US with horror, and I really do think we're watching the rise of fascism in the US as we speak, and watching, sort of following a few. I'm just trying to think of the word. I don't know if you're watching. I think it's the Alternative National Park Service. If you follow them on Facebook and just hear what Elon Musk and that new department's actually doing in the US, and how that message is actually getting out to the broader community, and actually it's just dissenters and actually secret ways of actually getting information out. It's really interesting. It's terrifying watching it actually play out. But that speaks to why Croakey is actually really important. It actually speaks a lot to the bubble, as you've said, Alex, that we find ourselves in, people, with social media and the algorithm, and the fact that everyone is now getting their information from social media, from very right-wing media, and so people like us are often also only listening to their bubble. So again, we saw that play out when Trump got into power the first time, when no one actually believed that would actually happen. Likewise with the Morrison election, no one, because we were all in our own social media bubbles and only talking to our friends and not really understanding that there were many people out there in the community that thought quite differently and had different information sources. So I think the challenge for us now is actually to understand, it's important, the role of Croakey and getting away from misinformation, but how do we address the misinformation? How do we correct that? But also, how do we actually get that message out to the broader community, the Sky watchers, the people who only watch Sky News, who read the Telegraph, who only get the information from Facebook? What are the mechanisms? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, is actually, who do we work with? How do we leverage partners who've got wide reach? How do we actually, and working closely with government, as we know is important, but how do we do that? Who are they? We can work with Croakey and publish stories, but how do we actually make sure that those stories have wide reach? And of course, the funding challenges that go along with that, and how we actually make sure Croakey is sustainable and survives, and our other NGOs. So I think they're the things that are going through my mind. It's a big challenge. I'm here with you and I'm up for it. But I do wonder, they're the things that I think are really key to us at the moment with these big challenges that approach us in election year.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yes, I think that's just so powerful and important. I think at Croakey, we really need to look out to, organisations like Karl's and the incredible networks, the Close the Gap campaign, PIGI and others, to help amplify our reach, because the algorithms are killing us. The digital platforms are killing us in terms of reducing access to our news, not sharing our news. I just had a neighbour who always used to comment on reading Croakey on Facebook, and she said, I never see Croakey anymore. I'm like, well, we're still there. So yeah, I think we need some sort of collective strategies around that. Alison, I know you've been listening hard, and Alison, you know, another Croakey director whose expertise we're very grateful for. So Alison, what's going through your mind?
Thanks very much, Melissa, and thanks Karl and Michelle and Alex and Rebecca for what you've just shared too. Really important things. Look, I think, I mean, probably sound like a broken record. I'm going to almost repeat what Rebecca and Melissa have said so eloquently. I think the real challenge for Croakey this year, and for this we will need all of your support and guidance and wisdom, all of you who are online and listening to this, is how we can actually diversify our reach, how we can get out to audiences beyond those who we have traditionally liaised with. What are the platforms that we might use to do that? How we might secure more funding so that we can continue the good work we're doing. And then the big key question for the year is, how do we anticipate what might come up in the election? Is it going to be a health policy vacuum? You know, is everyone going to try and keep quiet? Or are there policies that are going to come forward that we don't anticipate? How do we anticipate that? How do we prepare ourselves to respond to it in a meaningful and timely way? And how do we respond after the election? I mean, we know that, you know, potentially there's going to be either a government that is in a minority, or it's, you know, potentially going to be a change government. How do we position ourselves as an organisation to respond to that? So I think any advice and thoughts from any of you online would be really helpful to the board at Croakey, but also obviously to the editorial team. So thank you. And thanks for joining.
Thanks, Alison. I guess I just emphasise this is just a very brief overview, and really encourage you to follow up by email, etc., if you'd like more information about any of the things on our radar, or tonight's discussion prompts any ideas, etc. So just to give you a quick our calendar that we're looking at for this year, which I'm sure is familiar to a lot of people's calendar. We're looking at the WA election, obviously, the upcoming budget. As you've probably seen, Alison Barrett has been doing a series of articles on pre-budget submissions, and I'm sure we'll be covering the Kaha one this week. Looks very strong and newsy. So if we haven't, you know, if your organisation or other organisations have got strong budget submissions, send them through. We'll really appreciate pitches for ideas for articles before and after the federal budget. Obviously, we have a small grant from the Local and Independent News Association to do 2 Croakey Live webinars on climate and health before the election. So as soon as the election date is announced, we'll be springing into action to organise them. And Karl, that's also an opportunity to raise, you know, the wider issues that you mentioned around cost of living, which of course, you know, intersects with the climate crisis in lots of ways. So if any of you have thoughts around who might be good on those panels, we really want to try and profile local voices in particular, or stories from local communities, because I think often that's such a more powerful way of telling stories than the big sort of big picture abstract policy concepts. For us, you might remember we did our first ever collective fundraising campaign in the middle of last year. You know, we do operate on a total shoestring at Croakey. People would probably be shocked if they knew the resources that we run on. So that campaign last year actually helped save us in that it gave us some more regular donors, and Lena is going to be doing another one this year, end of April, early May. So if your organisations are willing to support in some way, whether it's just in sharing information about it or being part of it, or ideas for activities that we can do, we'd really welcome that. We're very excited. We have a significant well, actually 2 significant anniversaries this year that we will be marking. The 7th of June, some of you may remember 10 years ago, we ran a crowdfunding campaign to do the Just Justice project around tackling over incarceration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and providing a platform for the knowledge and expertise of communities. Well, it's 10 years since we began that project in June. So we want to do some work around that, and we'll be very keen for ideas for how we can do that. Professor Megan Williams and Associate Professor Summer May Finlay, who led that project, you know, we're all starting to talk about now, what can we do? So, you know, Karl, that again goes to cost of living issues and social determinants of health, as you raised, Michelle. And 1st of September will be our 10-year anniversary since we set up as a standalone website. We got a small grant from the Walkley Foundation. Before that, we had been hosted by Croakey. And it's interesting, there are still some people who think we are connected to Croakey. It is how we got our name. But anyway, that's a 10-year anniversary. And if anyone wants to help us celebrate, have a party, do some good things, we'll be really keen to hear from you.